Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be looking at Apple's Mac Mini, the M1 version, and compare it to a Hackintosh that I've been using for the last few years. Most of the videos that I've been seeing over the last while have been from videographers and music producers and showing all the different benchmarks that they've found by using these computers. One thing I haven't seen is how fast these M1 Macs are when you're using them with a photography workflow as opposed to video. That's what I'm going to run through over the next little while, so stay tuned. When I first started using my Hackintosh that I received about 2.5 years ago, I was amazed by the speed of it. Everything about it was faster. Ingesting the images was quicker because of the USB 3 speeds, and I was using a 6-core chip and everything just was blazingly fast to me. Over the last few years though, because of the fact that we had all of these new chips coming, the operating system was getting less and less compatible. I haven't been able to even get up to the level of Catalina on my Hackintosh, so I'm stuck with a version of Sierra that was constantly giving me problems, especially when it came to drivers and USB. So I decided to get an M1 Mini. Now, what I'm going to show you over the next little while is a direct comparison of running through an actual real-world workflow as opposed to just using things like Geekbench and some of the other benchmarking software that's out there. But what I found when using some of those benchmark applications, my M1 Mini didn't do quite as well as my Hackintosh. Strangely, when I'm doing a real world scenario, the Hackintosh is slower. So let's take a look at how everything works out. Before we get on to the benchmarking and comparing of the specs of the two computers I'm about to talk about, let's look at a setting that is very important within the computer itself. If you go into your system settings, which you can see in the #1 image right here, inside there's an energy saver function that will allow you to set, as you'll see in #3, to set your computer so that it stops going into sleep mode automatically when the display is off. This is important because when this is off and you're running a process and then you walk away from your computer, every time the computer goes to sleep, it will stop all the processes that you have on the go. I found this out while I was doing my benchmarking before I set this, and it made everything take up to 3 times longer, which at first made me think that the computer was very slow. So do those settings first. So taking a look at the first computer that I'm going to compare today is my old Hackintosh, which I've had for about 2.5 years. It was a custom build that had a really fast SSD for all of my apps and the operating system, as well as an internal 850 EVO SSD for all of my working files. The RAM was very quick, and it's also a pretty fast processor. And with all of that, I was able to work about maybe 5 times faster than I was able to work with my old MacBook Pro, which was a 2012 model, which is no surprise that it was slow. The second one is my Mac Mini M1. I bought the one with 512 gigabytes of internal memory, and I got that one so that it holds at least all of my operating system and all of my apps, and also scratch disk. So then I also got the 16 gigabyte version so that if I'm running a lot of apps at the same time, then I don't have to worry about running out of RAM. And finally, very importantly, I got the Sabrent Rocket Extreme Q 2 terabyte external drive, and that's for all my working files. Reason I got this one, and it's quite expensive, but I got it because one, it's a lot less expensive than getting that much internal memory, but also it's just as fast as the internal memory, so it doesn't slow the computer down at all. And then also I have a couple of other external SSDs, but those don't really affect the speed. There are, of course, lots of other differences between these two, but these are the ones that actually affect how fast either model is working. Now let's take a look at the processing times when compared between these two computers while doing a typical photography workflow. In my case, what I did is I took 500 RAW files from my Sony A7R IV. They're really big files, they're 61 megapixels each and about the same size in megabytes, and for a total of 30.4 gigabytes. The first thing that I do when I get a shoot completed and I get home is I ingest them using Photomechanic. It ingests and renames at the same time. As you can see here, my Hackintosh, it would take 14 minutes and my Mac Mini 3 minutes and 50 seconds. The reason for this big discrepancy is because my Hackintosh stopped supporting USB 3 because of some driver changes during an operating system update, and it just stopped working. I was never able to fix it in the whole time that I had it for maybe the last year. My Mac Mini, of course, everything's working fine, so it's almost 4 times faster. So that's one big one, but also something that doesn't really count when it comes to processing, but it's still relevant. Second, the import into Lightroom Classic, I do it with standards and smart previews to speed up my processing later. The Hackintosh took 10 minutes and the Mac Mini almost 7, so quite a bit faster. Next, what I do in my process is I convert everything to DNG. There's two reasons for this. One is because it compresses the files down smaller without any loss in quality. So whenever I'm doing any of my archiving later, it makes things a lot faster. But what it also does is it creates a much larger preview file so that I can look at them at full size whenever I want to. If I use the straight out of the camera RAW files from the Sony, then it's only 1060 by something and it can look blurry, so it's a bit misleading. Now you'll notice that while doing this, the Mac Mini is twice as fast as the Hackintosh. Finally, I do all of my editing, which I didn't time any of this because it's just moving back and forth between images, and so it's kind of hard to quantify. Most of that would be subjective by how I feel that day and how fast I'm editing, so forget about that. Now next, exporting the JPEGs in Lightroom, exporting out to JPEG from RAW. You'll see the time here is 34 minutes for the Hackintosh and then 23 minutes for the Mac Mini, another big savings in time. And then finally, what I do is I don't typically give 61 megapixel images to my clients because they're huge and most people will never use anything like that. So I resize them to 24 megapixels using an action or a droplet in Photoshop, and it takes 18 minutes with the Hackintosh and almost 12 minutes with the Mac Mini. Now the total with those two, the difference is 1 hour and 46 minutes and 41 seconds of just processing times that I'm waiting for the computer, while it takes about an hour for the Mac Mini. That is a big difference in my opinion. Now let's extrapolate those numbers. We're looking again at that 1 hour and 46 minutes for the 500 images and an hour for with the Mac Mini. When you extrapolate that to 100 images, that works out to an average of 21 minutes and 20 seconds for the Hackintosh and 12 minutes and 7 seconds for the Mac Mini. So if you extrapolate that out to a 2,000 image wedding, which is pretty standard for weddings in my world and many people that I know, that's a total of 7 hours and 6 minutes using the Hackintosh and 4 hours with the Mac Mini. If you extrapolate that again to an entire season of weddings, that works out to 5 days, 22 hours and 13 minutes, or 142 hours for the Hackintosh, and 3 days, 8 hours and 47 minutes, or 80 hours for the Mac Mini. That is a 77% faster processing time using the Mac Mini. That automatically makes it worth the purchase price just in one season. Now, does this mean that everybody's going to get the same results that I have had, and is everything going to be great when you get a Mac Mini? Not necessarily. There's a couple of things that you need to consider because this test is pretty subjective. It's very specific to my workflow. RAW files are very different between different cameras. I use Sony, other people use Canon, Fuji, and Nikon. So the file sizes are different, they're compressed differently, they're treated differently by the computer, so you're not necessarily going to get the exact same results. Also, the file sizes make a huge difference. So if you're working with a 24 megapixel camera, all of these numbers will be a lot shorter than with mine. Also, your workflow will be different. But generally speaking, it's going to be faster using the Mac Mini. I was 100% sure when I bought it, so I was quite relieved. Now, the other thing to think about that I didn't test for is the time it takes just to move from one image to another, to go between one screen or one dialog box to another. I don't know if it's fast or not. Both seem relatively quick, but I can only assume that it's a little bit faster with the Mac Mini, but it probably doesn't make a big difference. Now, there's also applying various actions that you would want to do, especially if you're doing it to a whole bunch of images at once. I didn't take that into consideration, and I also didn't mention how long it takes to do my final backups. I have two 8 terabyte backup drives that I use to back up everything. And I know for a fact that when I was backing up things or backing up images from my Hackintosh, it was running at about 160 megabits per second, where when I'm using my Mac Mini, it's over 200. So that's also a little bit faster, but I didn't take that into account for the final numbers. So there you have it. That's everything that I've discovered over the last few weeks with this M1 Mini. If you've had any similar experiences, please let me know in the comments below, or if you have any other questions, let me know as well. If this has been useful to you in any way, please hit the subscribe button and give me a like, and stay tuned for more content like this in the future. In the meantime, have a great night, and we'll talk to you soon.